and welcome to Art Inspiration with VKH. I'm Veronica, the V in the VKH. I have been an amateur artist for 4 years, the last 2 years focusing on watercolor. And I have been a teacher and I work in education for the last 24 years. So I love teaching and I love art. So welcome to my channel and welcome to Art with me. Okay, now that we have our paint area prepped and ready to go, I'm going to show you how I would do a very simple landscape scene, but I'm also going to use this as an opportunity to teach you the different type of watercolor techniques. So I am going to take my pencil and I'm going to press harder than I normally would because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. But I'm going to start by just making a little bit of a mountain in the background. And then I'm gonna go like this. And then I'm gonna go down here and this will be some water. And that's gonna go like that. And maybe we'll have a little tree scene over here. Okay, so I've got my initial lines sketched that I just need to do. So I know where everything is going to be. And then I'm going to start to activate my paint. So I know I'm going to want to use kind of a grassy green. So I take my paint, dip it in, I'm gonna activate, I swirl, 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 swirl in my dirty water cup, swirl to activate. And I might actually also add some to one of these little paint palette cups. So I've got that ready to go. And if you have a spray bottle, you could use a spray bottle. I just use a water cup. And so I got that ready to go. I activate that. Okay, and I'm gonna clean that brush. Maybe I'm going to use this sort of light blue. So again, I can activate it in my painter's palette, actual painter's palette. And then I'm going to activate it in here so I can have it two places, because the benefit of using it in one of these little, in a device like this is then I can mix the colors. You don't want to do that in this itself. You want to keep the colors clean and separate. So I'm going to do that, and maybe we want to have this nice dark turquoise color. And I might want to put that in this one. Get a little bit, because if I'm going to do a landscape, I'm going to need some blues, I'm going to need some greens, and maybe I want to do this one too. This is a beautiful color blue, and I'm just going to activate it because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with it. And then I'm going to activate this one as well. And actually I'm going to take this one and I'm going to mix it a little bit into the light blue so we can see what happens. Okay, and I think maybe just a smidge of this blue will activate as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna activate it here, mix it a little bit right there. Okay, so the first type of painting technique for watercolor is called wet on wet. That means I need to get my paper wet and I need to have a wet brush. So, or wet paint with a wet brush. You can use, for wet on wet, it's good to use a bigger sized bristles because we're going to saturate. I always do the sky first in my landscapes, or the background first. You always do the background first. For me, it's a sky. It might be something different for you. If you do a room, it could be the wall color or what have you. This is where my clean water cup is going to come in handy, because I'm going to get this paintbrush nice and wet, and I'm just going to paint the water right onto the paper because I want to activate the paper. You don't want so much water that you have puddles. I'm going to go right down to that mountain line, and then come back up. Okay, get this nice and wet. And then I'm going to switch brushes because this is where you can play around with your brush sizes as well. I may come back to that, but I'm going to go back to this one because I like the rounded tip of it. And I'm gonna go back to that blue that I originally used, and I'm gonna show you what happens in a wet on wet. So since the paper is wet, the water activates the paint in a way where the paint will spread. And so you can try if this is your first time ever doing this, you can kind of try. I'm gonna go right to the paint palette for this, and you can see what the paint will do. You could do a straight across effect. You could do an up and down effect. For the background for clouds, and the sky, I think a swirl is great. Come down to that mountain line. And then this is where, oh, you know what? Let's see what this blue will do, because it's going to be a little bit, ooh, it's a little different blue, which is kind of fun to do. Or maybe over here, we'll do some, and maybe we'll go back to this blue down here or up here and swirl it so we get some cloud actions. And you can, I don't know if you can see, but the actual paper is starting to bow a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but it's starting to raise up a little bit, which is why we taped it yesterday. Okay, I think this looks pretty cool. And I might take this darker blue and just add a smidge up here, because sometimes at the corners and the tops, it's nice to have a darker color for a shadowing effect. So I'm gonna see what that does. Cool. Okay. Maybe I'll take a little bit more of this blue in the center. And then we're just gonna see what it does. We're just gonna let it go, just like that. Now we're gonna let that dry completely, because if I try to paint over it, it's just gonna bleed into it, and that is definitely not what I want it to do. And so see, this is where I'm gonna clean my brush off, and I'm gonna do the same exact thing, but I'm gonna do it on the bottom. So I'm gonna switch my brush, go back to my big brush, and I'm gonna go wet on the bottom. This is gonna be grass. So I'm just gonna paint the water on. A little bit more on the bottom. Again, you don't want puddles of water. And you can paint red on that green painter's tape, it won't even matter. And it does a good job. It shouldn't bleed through, hopefully. Okay, and now let's switch and let's do the grass. Clean water. All right, let's see what happens. Ooh, it's a little wet. That's really wet. Look at that beautiful green. And maybe I'm gonna go up and down this time instead of across, because grass tends to grow like this, right? And I can go right up to that line. And if it goes over, that's okay, because we can fix it later. And so there we go, that's awesome. Maybe I wanna go right into it and start to see what this would do. Again, pulling down because grass is green. And I kind of just want to see what that's going to do and what I need to do to it later too, to add some more to that. But that's kind of pretty cool. Okay, let's see how this is doing. Oh, that is doing pretty good. It's still kind of wet. So I'm going to leave it. Now, since it's still a little bit wet, let me show you what you can do with it, if you so choose. You could always take your paper towel or a sponge and simply go like this and put some clouds into it. And you could do it right away. You don't even have to wait. You could just do this where, do you see what it's doing? It's kind of you kind of get some cool cloud shapes there, which is kind of awesome. Nice, that looks so cool. And then with my green grass on the bottom. Okay. And then I'm going to mix a different sort of blue. I'm gonna do this pale. You can tell I love this color. I'm gonna mix this one. And instead of doing wet on wet, let's do wet paint on dry paper. And this is going to be a watercolor. Oh, that's cool. I need a bigger brush because that's too small. So I'm gonna go back and get my big rounded brush again. Get it wet. I never like to have wet water droplets on here because then they drip down and it makes it super wet. So I'm just gonna get rid of those. And then I'm just gonna make some strokes for some water. And again, water kind of goes this way, so I'm gonna go up and down. Now I could get my paper a little bit more wet and do a sort of wet on dry, wet on wet effect and spread the paint around, because we'll do that too if you add some water while the paint is on there. But that's kind of cool looking. Okay. And maybe, okay, now that it's wet and activated, maybe I want to go back to this turquoise blue. And maybe I want some shadowing over here. So maybe I want this to be a little bit more blue coming around this land where we're gonna, in the next video, I'll show you how to do a little bit more detail work to it. Maybe we want it like this. And maybe we want to swirl it like this to give it some wave effects. Maybe you want smaller waves in the background because then it's going to look a little bit more. And then again, we can go back over this and layer, because that's what watercolor is all about. It's all about layering. Okay, I'm gonna end this video here because I wanted you to get the idea of wet on wet, and I do need this to dry before I move on to the next part.